My name is Isabel Harper, and I was 31 years old when I realized my childhood home, the one I'd inherited from my grandmother, was no longer mine in any way that mattered. Not emotionally, not spiritually, and soon not physically either. It happened on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. I had just come home from a site inspection downtown. My shoes were still dusty from a construction site, my inbox overflowing. I called my father about a leak under the kitchen sink, expecting a grumble and maybe a vague answer. Instead, I got everything. He didn't hang up. That was the part that mattered. "Who was that?" my mother asked, voice half muffled. "Isabel," my father replied, careless. "Going on about the faucet again. Always something with that house." The pause before he continued made my heart stall. "She's a burden," he said flatly. "Always has been. A burden." I stood frozen in the hallway, phone pressed to my ear, not breathing. My mother gave a low laugh. "Well, at least the trip's on her dime. It's the least she can do considering we let her keep the house." My house. They didn't know I was still on the line. "She won't push back." My father continued, more confident now. "She wants our approval too much. Once we're home, we'll ease her into the idea of adding us to the deed. She's weak. She'll fold. She's not going anywhere," my mother said, laughing again. "She works too much to even use the place. Might as well go to us." Retirement security. I hung up the call then. Not because I couldn't bear to hear more, but because I'd heard enough. I didn't cry. Not then. I sat on the couch, shoes still on, phone trembling in my hands, and stared at the place I used to love. The crown molding my grandmother insisted on keeping, even when trends changed. The pale blue walls I had painted after she passed. The old oak staircase that creaked in the same spot it had for 30 years. And I felt nothing but cold clarity. They never saw this place as mine. They saw it as theirs, just waiting for me to loosen my grip. So I made a decision. No tears, no confrontation. Just one move. Quiet. Legal. Absolute. I would sell the house. I would transfer every asset. I would vanish. 3 days before they returned from their 6-week European vacation, the house would be empty. Their key would no longer fit. And in the middle of the kitchen island, the one my mother had always hated, would be a simple note. "Surprise. A burden did this." I didn't know then what the fallout would be. I didn't care. They'd planned to manipulate me into handing them everything. Instead, I handed them nothing. And I left with peace. I didn't grow up in a house filled with warmth. My parents, Daniel and Elaine Harper, weren't abusive in any overt way. But love in our home came with strings. Conditional affection, measured praise, smiles earned only by achievements they deemed worthy. We lived in a modest duplex in the northern suburbs of Denver. My father worked construction, skilled but bitter. He resented every missed opportunity, every coworker who climbed higher, every boss who reminded him of his own failures. My mother floated between part-time jobs, receptionist, office assistant, part-time retail, and spent more time criticizing my posture than encouraging my dreams. To them, I was an investment. Every dollar spent on me was treated like a withdrawal from their imagined future. My escape came every other weekend in the form of my grandmother, Margaret Harper. Grandma lived in the house on Ashgrove Lane, a quiet craftsman tucked between towering elms and lavender bushes that bloomed every spring. She had been a professor of history and a quiet force of nature. Her house smelled of old books, fresh bread, and safety. She noticed me, listened, encouraged. When I was 10, she gave me a set of watercolor pencils and said, "The world needs builders of beauty, Isabel. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She supported me through art classes, summer design camps, and eventually through every application I sent to architecture schools. When I got into Cal Poly on a scholarship, my parents didn't congratulate me. "College is for rich kids who can afford to waste time," my father muttered. "You think you're better than us now," my mother added. "They didn't help me pack. They didn't even visit during my 5 years in California. But Grandma called every Sunday. When I graduated top of my class and returned to Denver, she hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. "You built something from nothing," she whispered. "Now make it yours." I landed a position at a prominent design firm downtown and spent my 20s grinding, drafting, revising, learning. I bought my own car, paid off my loans. When Grandma passed away from a stroke 2 years later, I was devastated. But she left me everything. The will was blunt, precise, and irrevocable. To my granddaughter, Isabel Harper. I leave the home at 347 Ashgrove Lane. No conditions, no co-owners. She alone knows how to preserve it. My parents received a small inheritance just under $25,000, which they spent on a cruise and a new entertainment center. The house was mine, fully and legally, but not for long. Within a few months, my father's knees began to ache. My mother said the stairs in their old place were too much. They started spending weekends at my house, then weekdays. Then they simply never left. At first, I rationalized it. They were family. It was temporary. But weeks turned into months. They started calling it the family home, made casual remarks about our renovation plans. My mother ordered curtains without asking. My father installed a new light fixture in the hallway and removed the art I had framed there. When I expressed discomfort, they looked offended. "Don't be ungrateful," my mother snapped once. "We gave you everything. This house wouldn't even be here if not for us." The logic made no sense, but the guilt landed like a punch. Every time I set a boundary, they pushed back harder. "Family doesn't keep score," my father said when I asked them to contribute to utilities. "But somehow I'm always the one paying," I'd whispered, but only to myself. By the time they proposed their once-in-a-lifetime trip across Europe, I was so emotionally exhausted that I didn't argue. I offered to help with expenses. Somehow that turned into covering nearly the entire trip. Airfare, hotels, meals, souvenirs. When they flew out of DIA waving cheerfully at the gate, I stood in the terminal empty and resentful. But I still didn't stop them. I still wanted to believe we could heal, that they could change, that maybe I hadn't been a disappointment after all. Then came the call. The moment the word burden passed from my father's lips, it was like a curtain tore open. I wasn't their daughter. I was an account they meant to drain. And I finally knew the truth. This house had never felt less like home than when they moved in. It was time to make it mine again. Or let it go on my terms. The house on Ashgrove Lane had once been a sanctuary. Now it felt like a stage set for a performance I no longer controlled. For 3 years, I lived like a ghost in my own home. My parents had slowly, expertly laid claim to everything. My mother's ceramic vases lined the mantel. My father's recliner took the best view of the fireplace. The bookshelves, once filled with my architectural texts and travel memoirs, now displayed trinkets from their cruises, framed photos of people I barely remembered. They never paid a dime toward the mortgage, the property taxes, or even the utilities, but they commented on every decision I made. "I don't like that wall color," my father said one evening, glancing at the living room I had repainted myself. "You should have asked us before getting that new washer," my mother added, arms crossed. Us. As if they were co-owners, as if they had earned the right. When I stayed late at the office or worked over weekends, they'd guilt-trip me for not being home enough. "This is supposed to be a family house," my mother said more than once. "But you're never here, always out trying to impress strangers." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I started buying time, detaching emotionally, watching. I paid for a new fence, then a new roof, both needed, both expensive. My mother criticized the tile choice. My father complained about the workers. But they didn't offer to help, not once. When my firm awarded me a bonus for completing a major museum redesign, I bought myself a modest weekend trip to Santa Fe, my first vacation in years. My father's reaction. "Must be nice to waste money while we eat leftovers." That same week, they mentioned their dream of visiting Europe before it's too late. I nodded, politely, thinking little of it. A few days later, my mother casually asked if I knew how to take out a home equity loan. My ears burned for what I asked. For our trip, my father said. We could use the equity in the house. You mean my house? I asked carefully. The one that's in my name? He didn't flinch. Don't be selfish, Isabel. It's the family home. I almost laughed. Almost. I refused to sign for a loan. But guilt pulled me back in like it always did. I offered to help with flights. That offer turned into hotels, then museum passes, then full coverage. You've always been generous, my mother said sweetly at the airport, tucking the tickets into her carry-on. It's what your grandmother would have wanted. I swallowed the bile in my throat, nodded, smiled. They left the country with matching luggage, fresh passports, and my money. I stood in the driveway watching the Uber pull away, and I finally asked myself a question I should have asked years ago. What if they never come back? Would I be sad? Would I feel guilty? Or would I breathe for the first time? The answer terrified me, because it wasn't sadness, I imagined. It was peace. The next day, I walked into my office, closed the door, and pulled out the deed to the house. My name, mine alone, stared back at me in bold print. I called my lawyer. Then I called my realtor. Then I called a moving company. I didn't tell a soul, not even my best friend. This wasn't just a sale. It was a removal, a severing. If I'd told anyone, they would have tried to reason with me, urged me to have a conversation, a confrontation, a family meeting. But I knew my parents too well. I didn't need to confront them. They had already revealed everything when they thought I wasn't listening. She's a burden, my father had said. So I started lifting that burden, box by box, document by document, memory by memory. And I did it all while they posted smiling photos in Rome and Venice and Madrid. Their captions were filled with wine and sunsets. Mine were drafts saved on my hard drive with names like Exit Plan and Ashgrove Final. They had no idea. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The moment the word burden left my father's mouth, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was precision, cold, sharp, and focused. I didn't scream into a pillow. I didn't cry on the bathroom floor. I opened a clean document on my laptop and titled it Transition Strategy. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind buzzed with checklists, documents I needed to gather, utilities to transfer, digital traces to delete. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Then I took the first real action. I contacted my attorney, Naomi Keene, who had helped me with previous contracts for my freelance architecture clients. This is about my house, I said calmly when we met at her office. My parents have been living there rent-free for 3 years. I pay for everything, but now I want to sell. She leaned back slightly. Is the property in your name exclusively? I have the deed, the will, tax records, utility statements. Then you're fine, Naomi said, scanning the documents I had brought. They have no legal claim. You're not obligated to house them. You can sell tomorrow if you want. I nodded. They'll be furious, she added more gently. I'm counting on it, I replied. The next call was to Devin Walsh, a discreet, high-efficiency realtor known for private sales. We met at a quiet cafe 2 neighborhoods over. I explained the situation without embellishment. I need it sold quietly. No signs, no open houses, no neighbors involved. Devin raised an eyebrow. Family dispute, family detachment, I corrected. He ran numbers. Current market value of the house approximately $980,000. If I wanted a quiet sale within 5 to 6 weeks, I might settle for a bit less, maybe $940,000 or $950,000. That's fine, I said. You're serious about this, he asked. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. From that moment, I operated like a machine. I scheduled the moving company, reserved a short-term rental cottage in Aspen, fully furnished, no forwarding address. I opened new bank accounts, canceled old credit cards, changed my phone number. I cleared out drawers, closets, hard drives. I sorted everything into 3 categories: mine, theirs, neutral. The third pile, the photographs, the dishes with unclear origin, the decorative clutter, went into labeled boxes I paid to store in a private unit. I prepaid the rent for 6 months and listed my parents as the primary account holders. Every decision was documented, photographed, time-stamped. If they came after me legally, they'd find a wall of proof standing between them and any claim. On the 4th night of my plan, I found something I hadn't expected. A letter, handwritten, folded neatly inside a book of Virginia Woolf essays my grandmother once gave me. "My dearest Isabel," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope you know I adored you. You were the only one who listened, who tried, who dreamed. I gave you the house because you understood its worth, not just the monetary value, but the quiet it could offer you, the freedom. Your parents, they never understood those things. They took too much from others, always expecting someone else to clean up the mess. I saw that long ago." I sat in silence, fingers trembling. "This house is my gift to you. Not to burden you, but to lift you. If others try to make you feel guilty for that, walk away. And don't look back." I placed the letter in a fireproof safe with the deed. By the 3rd week, Devin had secured a private buyer, a young couple relocating from Portland, eager for a fast closing. Their offer, $955,000 with no contingencies. I accepted immediately. The sale would close 4 days before my parents were due to return. I packed everything except my resolve. The night before the movers came, I stood alone in the living room. The walls were bare. The floor echoed. The garden was silent beneath a full moon. I walked to the kitchen and placed a single sheet of paper on the counter. Surprise. A burden did this. The house no longer felt like a stage. It felt like a completed story, and I was ready to turn the page. The morning of the closing, I woke before dawn. Outside, the sky was still dark over Denver, and the streets were quiet. I sat with a cup of coffee in the nearly empty kitchen. No photos on the walls, no magnets on the fridge, no trace of the life that had once filled this house. I dressed carefully. A navy blue blazer, slacks, low heels. Simple, clean, professional. My armor. At 9:45 a.m., I arrived at the title office with my folder of documents. Devin was already waiting, tapping his pen lightly against his planner. He greeted me with a nod. "You look like someone walking into a courtroom," he said. "Feels like I'm walking out of one," I replied. The buyers, a couple in their mid-30s with 2 small kids, were prompt and friendly. They loved the house, said it reminded them of the ones they'd grown up in. I smiled politely, made small talk, and signed every page without hesitation. At 10:58 a.m., it was official. I no longer owned 347 Ashgrove Lane. The house that had once been my sanctuary, then my battleground, was now someone else's home. When the check was handed to me, I felt no joy, no guilt, no grief, only relief. "Congratulations," Devin said. "Thank you," I replied. "Let's hope the next owners get to enjoy it more than I did." At noon, sharp, the moving trucks arrived. I had already directed the crew, 1 truck bound for my new rental, the other for the storage facility in my parents' names. Every item was categorized, labeled, photographed. I supervised the process, clipboard in hand, never once second-guessing myself. In the primary bedroom, once mine, then overtaken by my parents, I found a shoebox hidden behind a row of my father's old work boots. Inside were letters, dozens, all from my grandmother. Most were polite, dated, and matter-of-fact requests for loan repayments, reminders about budgets, gentle reprimands about behavior. But some were harsher. "Robert, this is the 3rd time I've covered your credit card debt. Elaine, if you expect me to fund your next vacation, I want to see proof of savings first. Isabel deserves to inherit without your interference. Don't make me rewrite the will again." She had seen it coming. All of it. I placed the box in one of the storage bins labeled Parents, Private, and made a note on my master inventory list. By 5:00 p.m., the house was empty. I did one last walkthrough. The living room where I had spent quiet nights reading under the window. The kitchen where my grandmother taught me how to bake bread. The garden where we planted lavender together every spring. And then I returned to the granite island and straightened the note. Surprise! A burden did this. I locked the front door and dropped the keys through the mail slot. Then I got into my car and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The next day, I arrived in Aspen. My new rental was modest, a small furnished cottage at the edge of town nestled near the woods. Nothing grand, nothing flashy, but it was mine. No voices criticizing the paint. No one changing the TV channel mid-sentence. No one asking what I was doing with our house. Just silence. Freedom. I opened a bottle of wine, unpacked a single box, and sat on the patio, watching the light shift through the trees. That night I slept for 9 straight hours. It had been years since I slept that deeply. 3 days later, the emails started. The first one was short. From my mother. The key isn't working. Did you change the locks? Call us. Then a voicemail from my father. Where is everything? What the hell is going on, Isabel? You better pick up the phone. I didn't. Then came the escalation. You've made a huge mistake. You'll regret this. We're talking to a lawyer. I saved every message. Forwarded them all to Naomi. She replied simply, They have no case. You're in the clear. Still, I braced for more. They would come looking for me. I knew that. But what they didn't know, what they would never understand, was that I had already gone. Not just physically. I was gone from their guilt, gone from their narrative, gone from their control. I had vanished. And in the space they left behind, I found something unexpected. Not revenge, not triumph, just air. Fresh, clean, wide open air. It didn't take long for them to show up in person. A week after I moved into the Aspen cottage, I got a text from Jamie, one of my former colleagues at the architecture firm. Your parents are here, at reception, causing a scene. I closed my eyes, sighed once, and called Naomi. They're trying to confront me at my former job, I said. You don't owe them anything, she replied. If they continue, we can file for a cease and desist, even a restraining order if necessary. But I didn't want legal proceedings, not yet. I wanted clarity, finality. I needed to see their faces when I showed them who I'd become. So I agreed to a meeting. I chose the location, the Timberline Cafe, a quiet, upscale coffee shop in downtown Aspen. Public neutral and owned by a friend of mine from college. I arrived exactly 15 minutes late. On purpose. They were already seated near the window. My father's jaw was clenched. My mother had on sunglasses despite being indoors. I approached their table slowly, confidently. Daniel, Elaine, I said evenly, using their first names. My mother flinched. My father's expression tightened. Isabel, he snapped. Sit. I'm not here to take orders, I said calmly, placing my phone on the table screen down. I came to offer you a moment of truth. Nothing more. You changed the locks, my mother began. Without telling us. Without warning. You emptied the house, my father added. You stole it. I sold my house, I said. One you never contributed to. One I allowed you to live in out of guilt, out of habit, but never out of obligation. You tricked us, my mother hissed. You blindsided your own parents. I didn't respond immediately. I simply tapped my phone and played the recording. Their voices filled the space between us. She's a burden, always has been. She'll give us the deed. Just make her feel guilty. She's weak. She wants our approval. My mother's face went pale. My father's turned a dangerous red. You recorded us, he growled. You called me, I replied. You forgot to hang up. I was still on the line. And yes, I recorded what I heard. You misunderstood, my mother said quickly, hands fluttering. We were stressed. Traveling. We didn't mean any of it. You meant every word I said, because it wasn't a moment of stress. It was a strategy, a plan. You think you're better than us? My father barked. No, I said, but I know I'm stronger. They didn't expect that. My father leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. You'll regret this, Isabel. You made us homeless. You had a $25,000 inheritance and a decade to prepare for retirement, I replied. You spent it on cruises and electronics. That was your choice. You're heartless, my mother whispered. No, I said. I just finally chose myself. I opened my purse, took out a folded envelope, and slid it across the table. This is the address of your storage unit. Your belongings are there, labeled organized and paid for through the end of the year. You'll find your letters, your trinkets, and the shoebox you kept hidden in the closet. My mother stared at it like it was a grenade. We're your parents, my father said. You owe us. I owe you nothing, I said evenly, except maybe thanks for showing me exactly how not to live. They stared at me, wounded but defiant. You're cutting us off, my mother asked softly. Yes, I said. Until you can demonstrate remorse. Real remorse. Not tears. Not guilt trips. Responsibility. My father stood suddenly, his chair scraping the floor. We gave you life, and I gave you comfort for years in return, I said, rising to meet his glare. That balance is closed. I picked up my phone, tucked it into my coat, and paused. Whatever you do from here is your choice. You can reflect, or you can rage, but I'm done playing the daughter you think you own. I walked out, leaving the envelope behind. Outside, the mountain air was cold and sharp, but I had never felt warmer. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, I did not receive an apology. What I received were more messages, long, rambling emails from my mother alternating between blame and false concern. Voicemails from my father laced with quiet rage and veiled threats. Messages from distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years saying things like, they're devastated. They miss you. Family doesn't just walk away. But I had. And not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted peace. For the first time in my life, I lived in a space entirely my own. The cottage wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, one of which I converted into a design studio. The walls were painted soft gray, the windows framed in simple white. No clutter, no passive-aggressive commentary. Each morning, I made coffee and sat on the back porch, watching the aspen trees shift in the wind. In the afternoon, I worked remotely for a small architectural firm that focused on sustainable design. Evenings were mine, sometimes for sketching, sometimes for journaling, sometimes just to breathe. I'd underestimated the silence. How full it could feel when no one was demanding explanations. A month after the sale, I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Carla Whitmore, a no-nonsense woman with keen eyes and an impressive ability to sit through long silences. She didn't ask about the sale at first. She asked about my parents, about childhood, about love, and eventually she gave it a name. Isabel. What you've described, this pattern of guilt manipulation, financial control, this is a form of financial abuse. The words struck me like a bell. I had never considered it abuse. They weren't violent, they didn't scream, they didn't hit, but they took, relentlessly, strategically. They used family as leverage, love as currency, and guilt as a leash. And what you did, she said during our 3rd session, wasn't cruelty. It was correction. You broke the pattern. That takes more strength than most people ever find. I left her office lighter. Later that night, I wrote a list I never intended to show anyone, things I no longer owe explanations. Apologies for success. A house. My peace. Things I deserve, boundaries. Freedom. Love without conditions. I began to make new connections. Slowly. a book club at the local library, hikes with a small group of women who met twice a week, a ceramics class every other Saturday. And I reconnected with an old college friend, Mia, who had once been cut from my life simply because my mother didn't approve of her tone. She sounds like a nightmare, Mia said over wine one evening after I shared the story. She was, I admitted, and still is. But you're out, she said. You won. Not by beating them. By leaving. That night I slept through without waking once. I still kept the voicemail recordings, the emails, the notes, not out of fear, but because part of me needed the reminder that I hadn't imagined it, that survival sometimes means walking away with no explanation but your own clarity. The house was gone, but I had finally built something new, not with bricks, not with blueprints, but with space and silence and strength. 1 year to the day after I sold the house on Ash Grove Lane, I drove to the small cemetery where my grandmother was buried. The sky was overcast, but the air was clean, crisp in that high-altitude way that makes you feel like you're inhaling clarity. I brought her favorite deep red dahlias wrapped in brown paper. I laid them at the foot of her gravestone, tracing the name with my fingertips. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered. "I think I finally did what you hoped I would." I sat for a long time talking softly, not about the betrayal or the manipulation or even the sale, but about the stillness that followed, the quiet that allowed space for joy to return, not as an explosion, but as a steady, rebuilding hum. "I live in a little cottage now," I said. "The porch faces the forest. You would have loved it. I think it's the first place I've ever lived where I'm not watching my back." I smiled to myself. "I didn't burn the bridge," I continued. "I just stopped crossing it." And that was the truth. I hadn't left scorched earth behind. I'd left keys, belongings, records. I'd sent notice. I'd offered silence, not war, but they chose to rage anyway. A few months after the confrontation at the cafe, they tried one last time. A long email arrived in my new inbox. Someone had forwarded it without thinking. It was carefully worded, full of conditional apologies. "We're sorry if you misunderstood. We never meant for things to get so out of hand. Can't we start over for the sake of the family?" I didn't respond. I forwarded it to my attorney, and then I deleted it. By then, I was already living fully in the new phase of my life. I had started writing an article series on architectural spaces that heal how environment affects recovery, clarity, and autonomy. One of the pieces focused on the emotional weight of inherited homes and how to break cycles hidden in bricks and floorboards. That series unexpectedly led to a speaking opportunity at a women's financial wellness summit. I gave a short talk on designing personal boundaries in both architecture and life, and afterward women lined up to talk. Many were architects, some were not. But all of them had stories. Stories of manipulation, financial pressure, emotional blackmail masked as parental concern. One woman cried. Another hugged me. A third simply said I thought it was just me. It wasn't. It never is. And that I realized was the point of it all. Not just surviving, not just escaping, but showing someone else the way out. A few nights later, over dinner with Mia and two friends from the hiking group, someone asked, "If you could go back and undo it, keep the house, make peace with them, would you?" I didn't even hesitate. No. Not because I wanted to punish them. Not because the house wasn't beautiful. But because for the first time I didn't feel owned. Not by guilt, not by history, not even by memory. Later, as I curled up with a cup of tea and my sketchbook, I flipped to a blank page. At the top, I wrote, "What would a home look like if it never had to protect you from anyone?" I didn't have the answer yet. But I had the question. And that finally was enough.